This is part 3 of the Yaesu FT-2000 preamp repair video. First thing you need to do is check to see if your receiver is damaged and the sensitivity is down. In order to do this test, you need a calibrated signal source. This is what I had in the shack. It works very well, it's fairly inexpensive, gives you a solid signal, S9, every time you use it. Very important when you're running this test. It cannot change. It has to be the same exact level every time you test. Now you connect that to the second antenna port on the back of the radio. Turn the switch on, make sure you're at the 50 microvolt position. That gives you an S9 signal. Then look at your S meter readings. The best way to start is with the IPO off and the preamps in bypass mode. Look at your S meter reading. It should be S9 now. Now I'm going to show how my radio was when I ran this test. It shows a perfect example of a blown mixer. Here it is with the IPO on, which is really off. The preamps are bypassed. And here's amp 1 on. Here's amp 2. After much troubleshooting, it was determined that the first mixer IC was most likely problem, so here's how to fix it. The mixer IC is in the metal can just above where the X-Acto knife is pointing. Here's the location of mixer 1 under this cover. To pop these covers, I'll see how I do here. I'll lift the edge and then go from the back. You don't want to pry on anything else, so there's a lip, but it's pretty low. There you go. And it just pops off like that, thank goodness. Mixer 1 is dead center in the middle. I've popped the metal can off the mixer IC, and you can see it on the board right there. You should be worried already. If not, here's some close-ups. And you can see it's very, very small. I'm going to review quickly how to do the or desolder the IC. What you do is you get some solder wick, bend it at maybe a little more than 90 degrees, 120. Use your calibrated eye, and then I'll use a flat bladed screwdriver to represent the soldering iron. You would hold the solder wick downward against the base of the IC, go in like this with the soldering iron and push it in to where the IC is. So you can manipulate the solder wick by just pushing the tip of the soldering iron back and forth. And I have a small chisel tip soldering iron it's a little too big for it, but it actually works well because you can lay the chisel tip up against the side of the IC and desolder all 3 pins at the same time. I've already put flux on both sides of the IC on each, and I'll go in, desolder the one side, go back, might have to add more flux, and then do the other side. And each time, between each time, as soon as you get some solder on this wick, just snip the end off, bend it again, and do it that way. If you already have solder on it and you go in, it's just, you're wasting your time. And you don't want to heat that up any more than you have to. Those runs are very small on the board, and if you get them too hot, they'll lift right off the board, and then you got to mess around with gluing them back down. You can use epoxy to do that. We used to use epoxy under the run and then have like a piece of Teflon on it, and we would clamp it down and let it cure. We actually had an oven to cure it in, but you could let it cure for a while and then try doing it again. But the big thing is be very careful with the heat, because you are talking very small parts, very small runs on the board. Here's the old IC. The first picture here shows the runs after I've cleaned most of the solder off of them. The second picture, what I've done, it's hard to see, but I've added a little solder to the pads so that when I go to solder it in, all I have to do is put flux on it, lay the chip on there, and hit each pin with the soldering iron. That will flow the solder. There's the chip after it's installed, and it worked fine. I bet you thought you were done. You're not. Right after the preamp stages, there's a splitter that splits the received signal between the main receiver and the subreceiver. If you've blown the first mixer in the main receiver, you've most likely blown the mixer in the sub receiver. And what you do is you use your S-meter tester, like I showed you before, put it, connect it again, and then using your sub receiver, look at the S-meter readings there, and most likely they'll be bad. Here's the sub receiver board, which is mounted on the side of the radio. It's pretty easy to tell. It's the big board on the one side. There's nothing on the other side. The mixer IC is in the metal can with the lid missing right now, on the top left corner of this picture. It looks exactly like it was on the main board, and it's replaced in the same manner. Again, keep your heat down. About 610 degrees Fahrenheit is probably a good number. I ran it a little too hot, lifted a pad, but I was able to fix everything, and it did work after I did all my repairs, although the sub receiver is still down in gain. So did my repairs work? Yes, they did. After replacing the mixer on the main receiver board, I reran my sensitivity tests with the preamps in bypass mode. I have almost an S9 signal. With amp 1 on and amp 2 on, there are significant gain increases, as you would expect with a functioning preamp. After repairing the mixer on the sub receiver, S-meter readings were S0 for bypass mode and amp 1 also S0, and I did get almost an S3 with amp 2 on. So there is still problems with the sub receiver. I would most likely assume it's the next semiconductor, which in this case is a MOSFET. That's to be determined at this point, which leads me into my next video. I hope this video helped show you what's involved in replacing the mixer IC in the radio and how to test for whether you have a low sensitivity on the radio. I would recommend you send the radio into Yaesu for repairs. It's getting harder and harder. Each of these little components is more and more difficult to replace, and it's probably better to send it in. You should make all your efforts toward finding and locating all your RFI sources and eliminate those so you don't have this problem in the future, because it really would be terrible to have the radio repaired just to have it blow up again, which is kind of leading me into my next video. So stay tuned for that. It's coming out soon. It's going to be conclusions video, and hope that helps as well. Thank you very much for watching.